Okay, so much for these updates. I wanted, and I know that had a little bit of bad news in the last little while, so now we're going to have good news. And I really mean that. It is a remarkable story I'm about to tell you. But before we do it, I'm going to ask the lights to go down. Max here to help. It's a very short 8 minutes of a film being made here in the United States by Melissa Young. That's Melissa Young there, I believe. About this kind of opera, and it'll be a nice introduction for us into what I'm going to say. So just 8 minutes.
I work here as an employee, but I also own one share of the company. I have a say in what happens with the company, which is awesome.
We have a stake. We have skin in the game, as they say. It's a real business. We have goals to meet, but there's just this environment that we all love what we're doing, and it's very meaningful to us, and we all want it to work.
I have worked at large corporations where there's a huge hierarchy. It takes a lot of energy to operate in an environment like that. We put our energy towards our projects and our products.
Most other companies, I couldn't share in the decision making because I wouldn't have a vote. And at the end of the day, if the work I did produced profit, I wouldn't get to share in that because it would be going somewhere else. If I was concerned about what this was doing to the community, if I worked for another business, that wouldn't matter.
Cualquier empresario del exterior le dirá que lo más importante sea sacar el máximo beneficio. Nosotros decimos que la rentabilidad y el beneficio es importante para sostener a la empresa, pero que también es muy importante la generación de empleo.
We believe that it isn't good for anybody if somebody loses their job. If you lose your job, you haven't got money. If you haven't got money, you can't buy. If you can't buy our product.
El reparto de la riqueza más equitativa llega a más personas y por lo tanto más personas tienen la posibilidad de vivir más o menos bien.
La empresa es nuestra, pero somos trabajadores también, ¿no? Entonces no hay como un jefe que pueda haber en otras empresas, ¿no? Todos somos nuestros jefes y todos tenemos que tirar para adelante con la empresa.
La gran mayoría de las personas se integre más, se envuelva más y por tanto podemos ser más competitivos y competir con la empresa más mejor del mundo. Es el futuro, entendemos, del mundo laboral también.
En aquella sociedad anónima era realmente la sensación de trabajar para otro, acabar la hora y a casa y se acabó. Esto es algo como que forma parte más de nuestra vida, ¿no? Porque tomamos parte desde la cabeza hasta la cola de la organización, ¿no?
Al final que tenemos trabajo, que es muy importante. Muchas veces hay empresas que son capitalistas, si hay un tipo de paro, pues vas a la calle. Habrá unos que salen mal y otros mejor, pero tienes trabajo, no te mandan a la calle.
No te dejo la caña, pero tú tranquila, ¿eh?
Soy la segunda generación de una familia cooperativista. Las tres hermanas somos socias en Favor. Lo han hecho la generación de mis padres, nos lo han dejado en herencia y tenemos que seguir trabajando para dejar esa herencia a nuestros hijos.
Companies in this era of capital and job mobility are not really anchored in place. They're not really loyal to the communities in which they reside. And so as companies come and go from our communities, it kind of rips the economic underpinnings.
People losing their homes, the foreclosure crisis here, it's just been devastating. They say you keep doing the same old thing, you get the same results. And people are looking for results right now that's going to make a difference in people's lives.
We give incentives to businesses and they come into a town and they say, well, we're going to move here, and we give them some money, and 10 years when the incentive's over, they say, well, what town should we move to next?
My daddy's from Tennessee.
This was a unique idea that people would own the business. So the business can't pick up and move unless every single person who worked there said, yeah, we'll move to Florida.
This is a business and we're a co-op. We all have to have a strong mentality that what Evergreen and Ohio Solar is trying to do is going to work for us in our community.
Oh yeah, I work this machine, that machine, that machine, that. I'll be all over the place. Everybody learns everything, so we kind of rotate and move around. Yeah, you have to. Yeah.
We own this place. That's an extra reason to go to work, you know. Say like it's a house. If you rent it, not so much, but if you own it, you know, that's a big deal.
As you could see, this is a full-length film. You just saw a short trailer. I don't know exactly when it will be done, but it will be done soon, and it will be circulating around the United States in all kinds of places. You should be aware that more and more of this kind of thinking and this kind of work is happening around the world, including here in the United States. It is not getting the kind of attention it ought to, and that's one reason we're doing this tonight. So I'm going to try to fill in. Thank you, Mac. Okay, Mondragon in Spain. First, just some personal words. I spent time there about 2 weeks ago, and they were very kind. They made time for me and 2 other people to really be given a chance to ask every conceivable question we could in their headquarters in the town of Arrasate, Mondragon. This is in a part of Spain, in the north of Spain, in a territory where the community is an ethnically separate community called the Basque region, B-A-S-Q-U-E. Most of the Basque people live on the Spanish side of the Pyrenees Mountain, but a good number of them live on the French side, on the north of the Pyrenees Mountain. So the Basque country spans both Spain and France. But this Mondragon is in the Spanish part, and it is really a Spanish experience. It doesn't have a counterpart in the French section of the country. Let me describe to you a little bit and give you some personal impressions and then go into what they've done. This is a mountainous country, not high mountains, but a pretty mountainous part of the world. The mountains are the border between Spain and France and have been for a long time. And the mountains go into the Atlantic Ocean, where the French and Spanish can travel to one another because it's flat just by the ocean. From the border with France, it's about an hour and a half by car to drive to Mondragon, and it is in the mountains. It clearly once was a rural area, but now as you travel through it, every time there's a valley, in the base of the valley, there's lots of factories. So it's become an industrialized, slowly, but steadily industrialized area. Mondragon is a small city. I don't know what the population is, but I would guess 100,000, something like that, or maybe more. So it's not a little village or anything like that. This is a real city, looks like a city, and so on. Mondragon itself, very interesting. It begins, its formal date of beginning 1956. 1956. So we're talking about something that's more than half a century old. It was begun in 1956 because this area was desperately poor. A little bit of Spanish history. Spain, before the outbreak of World War II, had a desperately destructive civil war. A civil war in which a popular and democratically elected government was overthrown by a military coup led by a general named Franco. A bitter civil war, 1936 and 7, was fought. Some of you know that groups of supporters of the government there came from all Western countries, including from the United States. Here from the United States, the men and women who went called themselves the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. But in the end, the Franco forces won. Tremendous killing, a lot of damage. War was very, very destructive. And then before you could shake a stick, World War II descended. So by the late 40s, when the war was over, you had Spain ripped up by a civil war and then ripped up by the consequences of World War II. And the condition for the people up there was desperate. Mass unemployment, poverty, etc., etc. There's always been also a tension between the Basque people and both the French and Spanish governments over self-government, over the fact that they have a different language, the Basque language. I speak a number of languages. I couldn't understand a word of Basque. It is not like French or German, which I know it has no resemblance that I could identify. Many of the people speak it as their normal daily language. I was in enough villages where I could watch people speaking a language that was as foreign to me as some of you may know, languages like Hungarian and Finnish, which are very, very different from the rest of Europe's language. This is a little bit like that. So they had troubles. They were not given benefits from the central government. They had tensions. They sometimes even had military conflict between Basque people who wanted to separate from Spain and France and have their own country. And so it's a long history of tension. So into this poverty and tension and post-war destruction, something happened extraordinary. A local Catholic priest named Arizmendi decided that the way forward would be for workers to set up their own cooperative enterprise. Capitalists were not coming in there with any money to invest. The government wasn't coming in with any money to invest. And so he got the idea, let us set up cooperative enterprises in which the workers themselves will provide the money to start it, will own it, will run it, will make all the decisions collectively about their own labor process and what to do with whatever money they make from the operation. Okay? And here's the thing I want to stress perhaps more than anything else. This is not unusual. This kind of thing has happened in virtually every country on earth more than a few times, including the United States. Many examples. But what's really interesting about the one in Mondragon is what happened to it. Because with all the pressures against it, with all the obstacles in its way, it really is a stunning success. Let me give you some just dimension of it. First, it's in existence, so it has survived for over half a century. No mean feat. Most enterprises started in 1956 that were capitalist are not here anymore. So survival is not a minor matter in the history of enterprises. So they've survived. Number two, they currently have 85,000 members. They started with 6. They now have 85,000 members. In addition, they have another 15 to 20,000 employees. I'm going to come back to that because that's a problem, as you'll see a little bit later. The 85,000 members are the owners, operators, and decision makers of this enterprise. Of the 85,000, I thought you might be interested. 43.7% are female. So it's a roughly male-female, roughly equivalent. They have schools and university, big university. They've now currently enrolled 9,282 people in their schools, about 3,500 in the Mondragon University. They include enterprises that are industrial, that manufacture things, enterprises that do banking, enterprises that, for example, they operate the largest chain of supermarkets in that part of Spain. They have high-tech R&D labs. They, in their industry, are They sell more outside of Spain than they do inside. They're export-oriented producers. They have important contracts with General Motors to make components of automobiles. They're one of the cutting-edge companies in electronic automobiles, sort of the new kind of hybrid kind of they're big in that. They have expanded. They are now the largest corporation in the Basque territory, either side of the border. They are, depending on how you count, whether you count employees or you count sales, they're between the 7th and 10th largest corporation in Spain. This is a stunning success. By any of the usual standards of 50 years of economic experience, this is a rate of growth, an expansion, a diversification that is stunning. Now let me go back and be a little bit personal with you. I have a rent-a-car because I stay in France. My family's French, so I stay in France. So I drive from the French side of the mountains into Mondragon one morning, 30th of May, Wednesday. And first thing that strikes me as I drive through the city of Mondragon and come upon, with the directions I've been given, this place. The first thing that strikes me is it looks like a modern corporation. On the side of the hill, because these are mountainous areas, on the side of the hill are, you know, your kind of typical rectangular buildings, steel and glass, beautifully landscaped in the front with shrubbery and a little walkway and a lovely place to park your car where there are charming fruit trees growing, and everything is impeccably manicured and clean. And we walk into the building where we are supposed to meet those who are going to come to us, and it's, you know, again, spectacularly clean and shiny, a little fountain in the corner with some leather chairs around where you sit down. The young woman who's a receptionist behind the counter comes out, asks if you'd like some coffee while you wait. The man you're coming to see will be a few minutes. But in any case, it looks like, whoa, this is a well-oiled, well-organized place. And it is. 10 minutes after we sit there, at just the time, 9:30 in the morning, that we were scheduled to begin, a gentleman comes out. He's actually one of the people in the film, with a tie and a jacket, as he had when he greeted us. And he's going to be the man who takes us around. He's going to answer our questions. He's going to show us everything about it. And then we're going to go on a tour. He's going to show us the bank. They have their own bank, the Caja Laboral, it's called. They have their own bank. They have research laboratories. We saw those. And they have, in the town of Mondragon, a huge factory. Looks like about, I'm not exaggerating, 2 football fields, but with a kind of cavern, a little bit like an airplane hangar structure over these 2 football fields with immense assembly lines. And this is the, I don't know how you pronounce this in Spanish, F-A-G-O-R. Anyone help me? Fajor or Fagor, I don't know what it is. They make washing machines. So this is a factory in Mondragon, has about 2,000, a little over 2,000 workers who manufacture washing machines of various kinds, and we were taken on a tour all through them. The factory is spotless. The machinery gleams, super high tech. I learned things about how to make washing machines, which, if you're interested, I'll be glad to tell you about later. But the first thing to understand is you're in the presence of a very self-confident, highly polished operation that knows what it's doing, is very clear about that, very proud of what it has. And there's an easy camaraderie, which I'm not used to at all, between the man who's taking us around, who has some highfalutin title, Director of Communications, and the receptionist, who refer to each other by their first names. I know enough Spanish to get that. And the interaction between this gentleman and the people on the assembly line is the same sort. Very remarkable. And I was looking to see whether that was true, and that was really quite remarkable. Business done by, for those of you that pay attention to this. Business done by the Mondragon Corporation. Total assets, now a little bit over $40 billion. So you're talking about one large company. 30 million euros. So something on the order of $40 billion. And that's its sales. So you have $40 billion worth of business done. You have 85,000 members, another 15,000 employees. They have expanded. They have opened operations in many other countries. How many? At the end of 2010, 77 enterprises outside of Spain are operated by the Mondragon Corporation, including, I believe, 5 here in the United States. But in many other countries, including China, India, and many other countries. 62% of their industrial sales are outside of Spain. The retail operations, of which the largest is this supermarket chain, employs 42,000 workers. Roughly half of the membership of this thing works in retail. All kinds of retail, but above all in this chain of supermarkets. The name is, if you ever go to Spain, Eroski, E-R-O-S-K-I, is the name of their supermarket chain that they run. In the Mondragon University, they have a complete university. One of the people I spent time with on that day is a professor at the university, a professor of business administration, because that's what they need to teach people, how to run their own. That's what most of the curriculum is. How do you start and how do you operate a cooperative business along the lines that they've developed, which they believe work. And they cycle through endless numbers of people who turn out not just to be Spanish, but come from all over Europe. They even have to have language classes to help handle the multi-language problem that Europe has, to train people. They cannot accommodate all those who want to come and get qualified in running these businesses. 3,400 students scattered on 4 campuses. I spent a good bit of time with a professor who turns out to have been an American. I think they put him with me because we could speak a language that saved us a lot of time. The other people we spoke with there all spoke English perfectly well, but nonetheless it wasn't, things go slower when you have to struggle with the language. He got his degree, I believe I learned, from Cornell, or comes out of the Cornell school. He married he was in college, some teacher told him about Mondragon. He forgot all about it. Then when he graduated, didn't know what to do with himself. That happens to 1 or 2 people in the world. And so he decided to go back and look at this Mondragon that he remembered the teacher talking about, and he couldn't get over it. He figured out a way to go back there. He met a young woman. They got married. They have several children. He's now a professor at the Mondragon University, teaching business administration and doing research on this institution. So it is a visually stunning operation. When you stand on the side of the hill in this reception direction building, the administration building that we were in, you can look down into the valley, and the gentleman very proudly pointed, every major building you saw in the city that was at the base of the valley is part of Mondragon. They are obviously, the city of Mondragon is theirs. So here was the factory that made the washing machines. Here are the research labs on the side. Here's the headquarters of the Caja Laboral, their bank, and so on. It's all them. They have become the economic center of this city, which means that this is a city whose people, in terms of their urban life, their cultural life, their interpersonal relationships, are like a living laboratory for what the consequences are in society when your work is organized in this radically different way. Very, very interesting to hear. All across the hills are these things that look like condo projects, these houses that are built on the side of the hill that look very similar to one another, but are little condo units. And those are, of course, built by the Mondragon for the use of their members and for the public. Let me turn now to tell you a little bit how they run their business. since after all, that's kind of crucial to all of this. Okay. The single most important decision-making body is called the General Assembly in each co-op. Each co-op enterprise works as its own enterprise. They produce something, they have to work that out, it's them. They have a meeting once a year of all of the members. In most enterprises, that's all the people there are. In some enterprises, as I mentioned before, there are members, but there are also employees. The meetings of the General Assembly are only for members. So in a co-op where there are both kinds, the employees don't come to the annual general meeting, just the members. But in most of the co-ops, that's all there is members, and they come to the meeting. So what is the decision they make in that meeting? One, they make the decision whether to hire, or if they already have one, whether to keep the general manager. The general manager would be the equivalent in capitalism of the CEO, the chief executive officer who sits on top. Below the general manager are department managers. They divide the business up into different departments. Each of those has a manager. The General Assembly hires and pays the general manager and the department managers, so that hiring and firing is reversed. Instead of the manager hiring and firing the workers, it's exactly the opposite. Okay? In preparation for each year's general meeting, General Assembly, all workers are required, this is not voluntary, to attend a whole series of meetings where they are provided with all of the information that they must have. How well the general manager performed, evaluations of the general manager and the departmental manager, all statistics having to do with money. Are they doing well? Are they doing badly? Have they lost money? Have they gained money? Everything that would be necessary to make an informed decision is provided to people in preparatory meetings, which are done on paid time. This is not an extra meeting you go to. All workers are paid as a regular part of their work to stop making washing machines and to go to these preparatory meetings where they are given all the information. What else do? They supervise the general manager and the department. If they don't like what they're doing, that has to be changed. They have debates and discussions on how the general manager and the particular manager should behave differently. They decide the basic directions, the basic questions of directing the enterprise. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you some examples. They decide whether the enterprise moves, where to produce. Second, how to produce, what technology to use. What technology are we going to use? This kind of machine, that kind of machine, what? And there I had long conversation because I was very interested in this, and I think you might be interested. I asked, well, do you buy inputs, like machines, from other members of the Mondragon family? In other words, do you encourage that? It was as if I had insulted his mother. No, he looked at me with great intensity. Absolutely not. He could see I had touched some kind of nerve. We have a rule. Every co-op must go out, get bidding, and get the best machine at the lowest price. If it's a co-op, great. If it isn't a co-op, great. They make the rules of how co-ops function. This may be the thing that interests you most. I'm going to just give you some examples, partly because I'm still learning myself, and so there are things I don't know, but I think I can give you a flavor. The range of pay, one of the things they're most proud of. Early on, the various General Assemblies got together and worked out that they needed to make themselves different from other co-op movements. They needed to organize and institutionalize lots of coordination among the co-ops. In the history of co-ops, that's been a very serious problem. When co-ops try to go it alone for all kinds of reasons, the general history is they have a hard time. They really need to clump together and help each other, but they found that very difficult to organize. That's their way of viewing it, and so they're very big on that. So here's one of the rules. Out of the net revenue of every co-op, Net revenue is a difference between the money they get in from selling what they produce and the basic costs of producing it. So, you know, what you might call the gross profit in some sense. 10% of the gross profit is immediately withdrawn from every enterprise and put into a common fund to sustain the administration that coordinates among them all. So each of them has to finance their coordination with one another. That's very basic, and he stressed that to me over and over again. That's the first 10%. 45% of the net revenue of every enterprise is left for the enterprise itself to expand its production, to get new machines, to do what it needs to build their co-op. So that leaves another 45%. What is the third 45%? After the 10% to organize the coordination and the 45% to develop the co-op enterprise, the last 45% is really interesting. The last 45% of the net revenue is to be distributed to all the members. So this is a very generous profit sharing. In the history of profit sharing, that's a stunning amount of money to be shared out. But then, having explained that to you, then they smile and they say, but the worker doesn't get it. And you go, huh? And here's what they've worked out. The worker is credited, a record is kept, is credited with his or her share of the 45% net revenue. And that is put into a fund which accumulates over the years that the worker works there, and that's the basis of the pension when you retire. You basically, your pension is the share of the 45% that goes for that purpose in every enterprise. Which means all of the pensioners of Mondragon are jealously looked at by everybody else in Spain because they get the Social Security that everybody in Spain gets, and on top of it, they get their share of the profits of the co-ops in which they worked according to the number of years that they worked there. But to sweeten it, they have a further arrangement. What you do get at the end of the year is a little bonus. And the bonus is 7% of whatever you've accumulated towards your pension to that year. You don't get the 45% that's your share of the profit. You get 7% as a bonus on whatever you've accumulated over however many years of your share that's building to your pension. So in a sense, the 45% you get partly when you retire and partly in an interest rate now. And 7% at a time when global interest rates are like 1 and 2 is a very nice thing indeed. But he stressed to me that because we don't give it to the workers, this 45% is an immense fund for us to use to develop the Mondragons. That's where the money comes from to set up a university. That's where the money comes from to set up a research center and all the rest. So that's how, all those decisions were made by the General Assembly and can be changed at any time by the General Assembly. Range of pay, very proud. In most enterprises, by the way, each enterprise can set these rules itself, but there's so much peer pressure, you could tell the way he said it, there's a rule. In most of the co-op enterprises, the highest paid person is not allowed to get more than 4.5 times what the lowest paid person does. There are some exceptions, including that washing machine factory, it turns out, where the gap is allowed to go to 6.5%, 6.5 times. For those of you that are not familiar, in the United States today, the order is something of 300 or 400 times. So what you have here is a fantastic compression of income and wealth inequality. And you see it everywhere. You just see it everywhere. There's a kind of comfort. You know, everybody has, you can see. I looked, I saw no beggars. I saw nobody panhandling on the street. Now, I wasn't there very long. I could have missed it. But you just got this sense of people, everybody having not a lot of wealth, but everybody being pretty comfortable, being okay. Everybody seemed pretty okay. And I asked that question to him and to several others, and I was told yes. We could never have survived if we didn't do. That's a condition of the survival of this co-op, that we're kind of all in it together. And if we allow, he looked at me, if we allowed the kinds of differences that you take as for granted in your capital, by the way, they said this freely. In their language, which I take to be excruciatingly important, in their language, they distinguished, and this was some of the people on the line too, they distinguished between what we're doing and the alternative as capitalist. That was the word they used. So they're comfortable with that dichotomy. So for those of you that are interested or come from places that people are interested, or you think of yourself as part of a movement that believes in democracy or equality or egalitarianism, this is a society that has made gigantic strides in that direction through the simple expedient of not allowing the job to be a source of inequality that is grotesque and enormous by simple fiat. That we will not do that. End of it. That's been a rule, and he said to me he cannot imagine that changes in any significant way ever. He said it'll oscillate, he said, between the 4.5 and the 6.5. Some other things just to help you think about this. There is a rigid rule, no competition among co-ops. So he said to us, once there's a co-op in a particular line of work, no other one can go. We do not want co-ops competing against one another. You can buy the output, one co-op can buy the output of another as an input, or they can share things, that's fine. But no head-to-head competition. That was a rule. I did not understand, and I asked, and he didn't understand me. I didn't understand quite why that was so important, but it clearly was very important. Perhaps the most important thing that in the area of the decision, the General Assemblies have decided, and of course this is interesting because it's what workers would do, that more important than anything else is the job. You know, when you think about it, it's of course obvious, but we're an American, or I'm an American, and so this isn't obvious to me. The first thing that's important to the corporations that I've worked with all my life is not jobs. The clever capitalist is the one who gets rid of jobs. Don't worry about jobs, he gets rid of them. If you can save 3 jobs, 3 positions you don't need anymore, you're a genius for efficiency. You got rid of those people. That's not their mentality. So for them, they're terribly proud, and they give you then as many stories as you have the time to stand listening to about how they manage. By the way, for those of you interested in economic planning and for the experience of the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe or China or Cuba or any place like that, listen to what I'm telling you, because they've solved that problem. When there is, they said to me, when there is no more social need for a certain kind of work at the extent that it used to be, and he immediately gave me an example. We've been terribly affected by the global capitalist crisis. We've lost a lot of our markets. So we had 2,500 people making washing machines. We now have, the number's 1,800 or something. A big chunk of those workers, there was no point in making these machines. They couldn't sell them. There was no market for them. And he said, that's a big problem. And how you handle that, we've worked out as follows. We have an elaborate system. It's fascinating to listen to. We have an elaborate point system. Every worker in every co-op is assessed a certain number of points. It depends on how old you are, what skills you have. Do you come from a big family or a little family? Are you low in the income pattern or are you high in it? Have you had this skill? Have you worked these many years? It's an immense array of qualifications. And that gives you a point number. And when you get a point number, then if there's redundancy, if there's too many workers in a particular area, you got to get rid of 500. The only question is, what is the menu of options you give to each worker? And which menu you get depends on your points. Whether you've worked a long time, you get a little bit better menu than if you didn't, and so forth. So here's the proud result. Whenever we've had to cut back, and he used the example of the washing machine folks that were redundant over the last 2 years, he said, we have either put them on pension. If they're older workers, we said, okay, you can go on pension earlier. Or we have, this is the crucial part, moved them to other co-ops, which we have the right to do. We go to a person, we say, okay, there's no more need for washing machines, but we have these 27 enterprises that need people. But there's a problem. They're 14 miles away, or they're 80 miles away. Okay, the co-op then, giving you an option, you have a choice, also helps you by providing the cost of the commuting is picked up by the co-ops in general to facilitate. And if you go to a place that's even further away, not only will you get the money to commute, but you'll get some extra points for your status because you've kind of taken a hardship position by going a little bit further than the next worker. He says in that way, we have not had to lay anyone off for years. Now, I don't know the details beyond that, but that's how they solved it. And more times, the workers, when we stopped on the line and we spoke to them, there were two people beside me, and one of them spoke Spanish, so he worked for me. I don't speak Spanish, so he was my kind of translator. And the people we spoke to on the line, we got over and over again, clearly, the number one thing for them, that you have a job. If something happens, they take care of you here. They take, that those words, they take care of you. I, of course, got nervous. What's the they? Shouldn't you be saying we? But when I listened, that's what they meant. They meant the co-op as a whole. And that's why they don't begrudge the 10% taken from the profits of every one of them, because that's part of what pays for all the coordination. That means they really have job security. And since they can read every day in the newspapers in Spain, I don't know if you're aware of it, right? Spain is now kind of Greece all over again. The unemployment, the official unemployment rate in Spain now is about 25%. For people under 25 years of age, it's roughly half are unemployed. So everyone in Spain knows how terrible it is. To be part of an enterprise that is not suffering these kinds of numbers or anything like it is remarkable. It's the same when I did a little bit of work with the statistics of the Caja Laboral, the bank. I'll bring this to an end now. And here's what struck me. The bank has about 18 billion euros in deposits from its members, people who bank, their customers. And it has about 17 billion euros out in loans. Very rare in this day for a bank to not lend out more money than it gets in deposits. What most modern banks do, particularly all big ones in the United States, and for that matter in most of the other part of the world, is they lend out everything their depositors, but then they borrow a lot of money and re-lend it at a higher rate. So it's they have a very conservative policy. Biggest problem, how to deal with the 15 to 20,000 people who are employees. They're not members. They don't have all these rights. They don't have all these guarantees. I asked, why do you have them? He said, well, part of it is we don't want to make a person a member until it's like a probation period. They have to work here for a while, six months, a year, something. So they're happy with this system, we're happy with them, and then they become part of it. And I said, yeah, but I can see from the numbers that we've had them for longer than that. Yes, he says, particularly when we go out of Spain and we don't know the culture and it's different. And he began to tell us stories about the Chinese workers and the Indian workers. They don't know how to handle it. Trying to explain, having meetings, trying to explain to the Chinese workers what this is. With the Chinese workers saying, wow, this is the craziest idea they ever heard of. They want to be told who's in charge, they want to get they expect something, which, you're having to explain to the Chinese communist worker what it is you're trying to do. It's an awkward moment, and they didn't smile. I mean, this is really hard for them. But the bottom line, here is a self-consciously non-capitalist, anti-capitalist alternative that has grown for 50 years and is a dramatic illustration that there is an alternative, contrary to Mrs. Thatcher, who wanted us to believe there is no alternative. There is one. It isn't all that far away, but they have an elaborate, many-language system of greeting you and giving you a tour. Any of you can go, because seeing it in a concrete, on-the-spot way has these advantages.